So this is the tutorial on sociotechnical aspects of new code collaborations. And my name is Elaine Raybourn. I'm from Sandia National Laboratories. I like to include a slide like this often when I give presentations because I'm often giving presentations to communities that are not my own. And so I am the type of social scientist that is usually embedded in teams. So my approach is very anthropological. I do both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. I have here a few things I wanted to mention. One is that might be interesting to this community. I was an URSIM scholar. This is something that's available to you if you are an early career within the first 5 years of your PhD. The French government supports this European Research Consortium in Informatics and Mathematics. And you can get a fellowship and you can work at 2 different laboratories. I worked at Indria and Fraunhofer. Also, my first code team that I really experienced was in Germany. So that's where I learned to be part of a code team, and I have very fond memories of that experience. And I have to say it has really, I think, influenced the way that I approach my code teams today. So I am part of the IDEAS ECP program. IDEA stands for Interoperable Design of Extreme Scale Application Software. And what we do is we work with teams on their productivity. We offer training, and we really look at ways to elevate the teams and elevate the science and the software so that we can reach Exascale. So I'm part of the hardware and integration section of ECP. You may remember that from Eric's presentation yesterday. And I now have my own interns that are from applied math and CS, and I actually really enjoy having teams that are multidisciplinary, and I enjoy the diversity of thought. So that's pretty much who I am. These are the different cultures that I've been part of. A lot of my work has been in modernization and immersive environments. I really like to create crucibles. I like creating environments where we learn about ourselves and others. And my favorite question is, why not? Okay. So I wanted to first talk about some assumptions and also some definitions, because as we are a community of very diverse domains, it's really important to be specific about what we mean when we say and use certain words. So I'm just trying to be a little cheeky with the pronunciation there. But so sociotechnical, the perspective that I'm bringing to this presentation and to my work is that I believe that the creation of code, the creation of software is a human activity, which makes it a socio-technical activity. And so by saying that, I'm saying that it actually integrates our society and technology, and they influence each other. And so that's the perspective, the lens that I bring, and that is the assumption that I have going in. Another definition is the use of the word team. And I know it might seem like we don't have to define this, but there are certain things I want to actually identify with this definition. Now, in our work with ECP, the Exascale Computing Project, what we do is we do research on large teams. We are trying to understand the ways they collaborate through the use of interviews, and then we also corroborate that with data mining. And so the way that we define a team for our project is 2 or more people who are interdependent with respect to the information and knowledge and tasks, and they have to be combining their efforts to achieve a common goal. Now, there are some embedded assumptions with this definition. One is that, first of all, there is a shared goal. So there has to be some type of goal that everyone can relate to and that they see themselves in it. Interdependence. It means that there is not someone who is doing something on his or her own. It is a type of problem where everyone on the team has to be able to participate and help each other. So these are the assumptions that I'm bringing to my definition of team. And now effectiveness. This is how we're defining effectiveness, and this is actually from the National Academies of Sciences, their report on fostering responsible computing research. And so the way that we're looking at effectiveness here is in the team's capacity to achieve the goals and objectives. And there's something that is very prominent in the way that we're defining team and effectiveness. And what's prominent about it is that it is very purposeful. It's goal-driven. This is something that it has an outcome. You can measure it. It's something that is very deliberate. And so what I'm trying to impress upon you also is that communication is very deliberate. It can be a very deliberate activity. You can either react to it, or you can be proactive, and you can master this domain. Okay.
When you say effectiveness, you say capacity to achieve something. That presupposes that it's in the future, right? It's not...
Oh, no, it could be... Oh, that's a really good point. Okay, let's go back. It doesn't have to be necessarily in the future. It can be the ability, the capacity, the ability of the team to actually reach their stated goals and objectives. So who is defining the goal and the objective is something to consider with respect to effectiveness. When we work with our teams and ECP teams, they define their effectiveness. It's, they measure their success. And in fact, we have methodologies where we help teams, we work with teams to know how to measure their own success. So here, this is, again, the ability of the team and the willingness for them to want to stay together, to work together to achieve these goals. But I like the perspective. Thank you for asking that. So I wanted to really employ what I heard the first day that we came together, which was that everyone likes to hike. So in this particular tutorial, hopefully I'm going to take you through a little short journey, which will take us from crawl, walk, hike, run. This is something that we use a lot in training when we talk about an evolution of something from crawl to walk to run. And so we're going to start first by defining what scientific research software teams are, what the challenges are, what are some of the dynamics that are involved. We are going to also then talk about how to create these highly productive and engaged teams. And I'm really going to treat in-person, hybrid, and virtual as pretty much the same, because if you can design for the extreme, which is a virtual situation, then you probably have mastered in person as well. And I'll show you how that works. Next, we're going to go from small teams to team of teams. And then finally, I'm going to offer some resources for you on how you can form and sustain scientific communities. Okay. All right, so first, scientific software teams. What are their challenges? And what might make these teams effective? And what are some of the cultural dynamics? So this is a quote from Eric yesterday. He said, "This is an exciting and terrifying time to be doing computational science." I absolutely love this. And for me, when I heard him say it, my ears perked up and I got excited and I realized, yes, that is exactly why I enjoy this Exascale computing project, because it is terrifying and it is exciting. And so I'm hoping that this particular statement does something to you viscerally. Either you're terrified, you're excited, or confused, or I don't know, but I'm thinking that this is actually a really, really nice way to think about what science is today. Science today is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We like to call that a VUCA environment. Science is VUCA. Modern science is unpredictable in the sense that there's a lot of ambiguity, especially working with exascale computing. We know that scientists are spending more time developing software. The projects are more multi-institutional. They are multidisciplinary. The demand for these, for writing code and the consequences are much greater than before. And also, a lot of these practices that we have to support teams, I'm talking about the social practices, they really can't keep up with the scale and complexity. And so this is a really exciting time. It's a challenging time. And so I know that Virginie also in her presentation, she also stated the same thing, that this is a very challenging time to be working on computational science. This is from Tim's presentation also yesterday, when he showed us this particular diagram of software. How many of you looked at this and said, wow, look at all the people who are involved in this particular architecture? Does everybody see the teams and the people behind this particular diagram? When I look at it, that's what I see. I see code touching other codes. I see codes that have to make their practices more explicit so that their users can grow, so that they can communicate their practices to other code teams. I see different individuals who are also becoming more aware with different codes. So there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation implicit in this type of diagram. So I just wanted to make a mention of that. And Tim, since it's your slide, or this was your slide, I don't know if anybody has any comments about what I just said, or Tim, if you'd like to say anything about that. No? Okay. All right. Okay. So what are the different challenges for these teams? And if this is based on some of our research with teams, and so they may or may not apply to your small team. But what we're finding from our discussions with teams is that really, a lot of teams today, the scientific software teams are really engaged with funding. It's very competitive. Usually funding funds the generation of results, not necessarily the development of software, which means usually that if it's not in a proposal, then writing different features that don't focus on results is not always practical or possible. Often refactoring is not possible. Sometimes scientists will teach themselves or they learn to write code, but they may not have a software engineering background. And also the perception of software process improvement techniques can be that they're very heavyweight and difficult to implement. And then many teams also worry about, the delays that are involved with having to worry about, their activities with respect to whether or not they can see some benefits from their investments. And so what we're learning from all of our research with the teams is that any time we want to even suggest a type of productivity or sustainability improvement, we know that it has to be something that's very incremental, must be integrated into their workflow. It cannot be something that is going to take the team in a different direction. So it has to be iterative and likely informal. So these are some of the research challenges that we are noticing. Now there's some other challenges with respect to development, and especially with the Exascale computing project, which is that all parts of the ecosystem can be under research at the same time. This is a very, very complex situation. Also, the requirements may change throughout the life cycle as our knowledge grows. This is science. And while we have an importance of reproducibility and sustainability, verification is very complicated. And, the real world is messy, so consequently, the software can be as well. Now, socially, what we're also finding is that there are competing priorities and incentives. Different teams and different members on teams actually are incentivized by different things. And there are limited resources often for teams, and there can be a lot of work that is under the hood, so to speak. And so it's either not, there's a perception that it's invisible. It might be a lot for a small finding. And then we have to figure out ways that we can reward that kind of work. There's also a need for interdisciplinary interactions, and for Exascale, with our boutique operations, which are small teams, we have to be able to scale them. And so much of our work is in trying to find ways that we can help teams scale. And so in our group, we like to use this as a tagline for the work that we do, which is science through computing is only as good as the software that produces it. So the software is an important part of the science, of computational science. Okay, so what are some of the things that make your small or large team effective? We talked outside, maybe did any of you have an opportunity to talk about what makes your team effective? We're now moving into the team effectiveness part. So. Yes, go ahead.
Question.
Okay.
So, this sounds great, and ideally this would be great to implement, right? But if you run a team for a while, you run into disparities, as you probably well know, right? And so that those disparities happen at the level of different people who work. And if you're out of luck, you find that one person, and so this is the effectiveness.
Okay, the effectiveness, right.
One person is faster than the others, which tends to happen.
Right. So if you, I'm trying to repeat for the reporting. So
the effectiveness of the team depends on that one person who justifiably finds out that they do all the work.
Okay, so does the effectiveness of a team rely on one person? And
so in other words, disparities in what individual people can or will do for whichever reason, right? No such involved.
Right.
Reality, right? And so this will lead to an unevenness, right?
Absolutely, that does the disparities that exist in teams, maybe individuals coming and going or different phases of the work where one person has much of the workload and others not. That all contributes to how we define a team as effective or not in that particular moment. That is actually a challenge, of course. Yes, thank you for saying that. Yeah. And someone else had his hand up?
No, not so much as that. I guess what makes our team effective is that we all have very similar objectives, which is we all come from the same background, so we all understand the difficulties and all that kind of stuff. So I guess we can compromise with each other more easily, as opposed to teams which come from very different backgrounds and obviously maybe have different objectives, which I guess can often compete with one another.
Right.
And then that makes a large team sometimes really ineffective because everyone has competing goals.
Right, that's a great comment. So competing goals can make teams ineffective, but when teams all work toward one particular objective or a set of objectives and they're all working together, that makes for an effective team. Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
I find it hard to say my team is effective because it feels like I do something right, which I'm not so sure about, right? But I guess what I'm wondering is it really good if the team is so homogeneous and we all have one goal and maybe we solve this one goal, but then maybe our solution is only useful for our team, and we can maybe have a greater impact if we have people with different goals in one team who say, okay, I want to use, let's say, this software package, and everybody has their own application. Then maybe we don't make so much progress, but we may create something which is more useful because we already in our team have the discussion that the whole community will have on a larger scale afterwards.
That's a really good comment. So you're talking about a team that might have different sub-teams within itself that look at different avenues so that you can accelerate your progress or your innovation.
Or just diversity in the team, people coming from different backgrounds and say, okay, we all face this challenge. And I guess IPAM is the perfect opportunity, right? So we all come from different backgrounds, all have our own projects in our home institutions, but now coming together and maybe see we face similar challenges and maybe we can solve them together and then go back into our home institutions and say, okay, now we have a solution that is helpful for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. That's a really good setup because you're looking at the diversity and you're using that to actually accelerate and propagate your innovation out to different communities. Absolutely, yeah. So just because teams work toward a goal that is shared doesn't necessarily mean that it's a homogeneous team. Okay, it means that they have a shared goal, and it can be a diverse team that has a shared goal. All right, thank you for for your comments. So this next set of literature comes from team effectiveness. This is a lot of this is the team effectiveness literature, interactive team cognition. And so I have a quote here from Nancy Cook, University of Arizona, and she says, "A team of experts does not make an expert team." So having a team or a group of individual players doesn't necessarily make that team expert. That's because to be an expert team, it requires a certain amount of effort toward communication and interaction. And so it's the interaction actually that makes the team effective, not necessarily the components. And one of the findings of research that she's done is that explicit communication is the foundation of team cognition. And if you think about it, it is through communication that we share what we are thinking, or we share our cognition. And one of my favorite theoretical perspectives is distributed cognition, which is an approach that talks about how our cognition is actually distributed across individuals, environments, devices, technologies. And so if we think about it that way, then this idea of communicating and interacting and being able to be explicit becomes really very important. So what actually can facilitate this type of communication? A lot of like serendipitous encounters when you're in person. Of course, having your sidebar meetings like we have them here or at a conference, and sharing food, actually. These are things that have been shown in the research to actually enhance team interaction and team communication. And so another really important part of an effective team is the team's ability to actually adapt to either some novel change. It can be adversity, or it can be in the laboratory some type of a perturbation. And so this is actually has been done in some research to actually make teams more resilient. And in my own research, in creating a training system using computer game technology called adaptive thinking and leadership, what we did was we actually created an environment, or crucible, where we could perturb the environment to elicit reactions that the trainees would use later on. And so in a sense, it was a situation where it was a crawl, because they were practicing communication strategies when an environment was perturbed in a controlled setting, so that later in the real world, if they encountered a similar phenomenon, they would be ready, they would have practiced the communication strategy. And so we find that this is research that is mostly focused on teams that do some sort of action. And so we don't know how well that really translates yet to science teams, but you can imagine that any type of team that's able to react well under pressure, or to some perturbation, to some anomalous environment or anomalous situation that occurs, that team is probably going to be indicative of a high-performing and effective team. And so these teams that respond quickly, they are what we consider to be more resilient and more adaptive. Okay. I wanted to just mention, because this is such a diverse group, which is really great, I don't have a lot of time to go into these details, but since we're focused mostly on interpersonal communication here at IPAM, there are some different things that you might encounter, some different phenomena. So example, we, as part of the Intercultural Communication Summer Institute, Mitch Hammer and Milton Bennett developed this intercultural development continuum, which really explains the process of what we go through when we encounter some sort of difference. So at first there might be, a denial that there's even a difference at all. And this is like if you're very brand new to an environment, you might be in Los Angeles and this is just exactly the same way that I experience, wherever I'm from. But as you stay longer, what happens is that you become more familiar with the culture. You're able to see more of the nuances. You're able to pull the layers back, and so you see things sometimes as they are, with your own particular lens, by the way. And so you go through this process. And you'll, more than likely, everybody does this. We all go through a process of, of looking at differences, and either we minimize them, then we finally accept them, and then we can adapt to differences. And so this is the movement from a monocultural mindset to an intercultural mindset. So just keep that in mind, because it might happen to you that as you're here, you might realize, or you might think, gosh, there's something bothering me. What is it? Just think about the fact that, there's a lot of change happening. It's a different environment and everything is different. So take some time to maybe think about what might be motivating that. And this other side here, it really looks at some intercultural skills. And this is really delving in a little bit deeper to the resiliency that I mentioned just before. And so here, part of our intercultural skills are being able to understand ourselves and others. And so we do this by first, understanding, exploring, having some dedication to be curious, to learn about other people. But it's not just learning about others, it's also learning about oneself. So having a good idea of what motivates yourself. And what your lens is when you interact with others. Okay, and so finally, an understanding of conflicts is something also that I have a little bit to share with you on what you can do if that does arise. Now, this image over on the left is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. I'm not sure if you've seen this. This is actually something that you may be familiar with. Normally, these dimensions have a lot of the different cultures kind of mapped in different parts of these dimensions. I chose an image that didn't do that because we're not spending enough time to really talk about that at great length. And the idea is not to demonstrate difference. The idea is here to pull out some phenomena or some different dynamics that contribute to sometimes a sense of not knowing what's happening. And so some that might be quite interesting, really, so we have up at the top power distance. This is actually very common. It is one's relationship with hierarchy of power, or, so it would be subordinate or superior, that type of dynamic. Next, it's not, I don't know if you can see that very well. It's individualism versus collectivism. So individualism being whether or not you feel that you have the locus of control. It's you use more I statements. Collectivists are more we statements, and seeing oneself as part of a group. And uncertainty avoidance is actually how well or how comfortable one feels with ambiguity and with the need to reduce ambiguity. Masculinity and femininity is not necessarily gender. It's really about whether one's egalitarian, that's on one side of the spectrum, and then more authoritarian on the other. And then we have orientations to time. So whether one is does things serially, one thing right after another, or time is very important. And other orientations of time being that it's more important to maybe finish a task and not necessarily be to stop something to start a new task. And then whether one is interested in self-gratification immediately, or it can be delayed. And so all of these different aspects really play into the way that we interpret different situations. And I just thought I would bring it up because in this particular group, you're so diverse that I'm sure that you're going to have a lot of opportunities to see how this will impact your team dynamics. Oh, there's one I forgot actually, and that is the way we process information. That is also something that is a dimension of culture. and of course our communication styles. High and low context cultures is also very interesting. It has to do with how much information we receive from the nonverbal versus verbal channels of communication. And so people who are mostly come from a high context culture, they receive a lot of information from the nonverbal channel, and others from low context prefer the verbal channel for the sharing of information. Okay, and so this is the slide that you can refer to if, if you ever are in a situation where you think it could be leaning towards a conflict, but, or a contentious situation, and that is when you're in situations like that, it's always best to think about your own assumptions and think about what you're bringing to that particular situation. What is the lens from which you are actually exploring this situation? So there are 3 things that everyone who can master this should do, and that is to have good internal self-awareness, external self-awareness, and personal accountability. And so, of course, external self-awareness is actually how well you're able to discern how others see you. Internal self-awareness is how aware you are of your own, what motivates you. And then your personal accountability is the action that you take to actually solve whatever the situation is, right? Okay. And so this actually relates to the first exercise that we did, which was a listening exercise. And in particular, Edward T. Hall, as an anthropologist, he was one of the very prominent figures in the field of intercultural communication. And this is a really great quote, because for me, it's focusing on listening, and it's focusing on making sure that you are in the right mindset when you are in that position of listening. So again, it's communication has more to do with releasing a response than sending a message. All right, so I thought that was really great, and I wanted to share it. All right, so then we've had some conversation about creativity and teaming. And so the really great thing is that here at IPAM, you will have lots of whiteboards, and you have chalkboards, and you can get together and use that space outside to interact. And I highly suggest that you do. During the pandemic, this was one of the things that we actually heard a lot of scientists say more than anything else, was that how much they missed the whiteboard. And so I actually wrote a little position piece about that. My hypothesis is that actually it's not the whiteboard that we miss, it's the feeling at the whiteboard that we really miss. So it's that feeling of unencumbered by technology, being able to share an idea with someone, and to feel free. And if you'd like to read it, it's a little cheeky. I try to be a little funny with it. But it happened to be something during the pandemic that was actually quite popular to talk about. And so finally, to wrap up this particular section, with just respect to creativity, it really takes all different kinds of people in the room, right? Or different ways of thinking. So you have to have good problem finding. We've got to be able to look at the problem and stay in that space. We have to be able to evaluate whether or not the course of action is good at the moment or not. And then having the flexibility to have good ideas. So I wanted to just say a little something about creativity, because this is one of the goals of IPAM, is for you all to be creative and to create new science, and to hopefully have some discoveries while you're here. So that wraps up this section, and I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about what we just discussed. Okay. Now I'm going to go through rather quickly, because I think that this is probably something that you're all familiar with, but I wanted you to have the slides so that you could look at them later. So with respect to looking at configurations of teams, what I really want to impress upon you with this particular slide is that actually this whole idea of us being either co-located or remote, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're working with colleagues that are in another country and that means that they're remote. No, what Virginie said earlier about wanting to improve or grow a situation where you have team members who are on travel and you have to find ways to communicate together so that you can keep accelerating your innovation. This is the type of environment that she's talking about. So if you have a fully dispersed or people call it also remote environment, then that means you really are functioning as satellites. You don't see each other. In the center, we have subgroups, and this is actually where you might have, imagine this as floors of a building, or it could be hallways in IPAM, where you're sort of co-located, but you may not be co-located with others necessarily in the same, you're in the same space, but not really in the same space. And then in the last configuration, this is where you have a co-location plus some satellites where you're fully dispersed. And so in fact, what the research tells us is that when we are fully dispersed, or if it's remote first, that's actually the environment that has the least conflict and the most amount of trust. Does anyone have any thoughts about why? Why would a fully dispersed, a fully remote environment be the environment with the most trust?
There's least communication, right? So
Pardon?
there's least communication, so therefore there's less data to be exchanged and therefore less things to...
Well, that's one way to look at it. But when there is communication, what can we say about that?
It's more formal also, right?
Exactly. It's more formal. It's more explicit. It is more purposeful. Yes.
Like maybe it doesn't create outsiders. I once learned that groups are formed not by what you have in common, but what you are not. So saying like we are not on the fourth floor, not in the hallway, that kind of
Excellent.
by exclusion.
That's a great comment too. Right. They're not forming any identity based on their presence or location, right? So they're not relying on that in the communication. What you both are referring to really is that in this situation, it is more equal. Everybody is equal. They're using the same communication modalities. They're using them likely the same ways. And they are, in a sense, they might identify with each other because they are fully remote. And so on our team, the ideas team, we are all fully remote. And so it's all equal footing for everybody. Everybody has to use Zoom. Everybody has to do the documentation. And so there is no opportunity for there to be a small little subgroup that, goes off in the hallway and creates some kind of angst. Yes? I'm sorry? So this actually comes from a professor out at University of Texas in Austin. And this is from his tutorial, Leading and Motivating Dispersed Teams. And so I would have to go back and look at all of the different, but I can do that for you, yeah. Oh, I think he has several studies that he's conducted with global teams. So that's where this data is coming from, global teams. So not necessarily science teams. Yeah, yes.
I'm surprised that there isn't a default example here of a single group, which I thought would have the most trust.
You mean like this?
Yeah, those three smiling faces.
Right, okay, yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, I can tell you, at IPAM we had the summer program, right? And so we inadvertently had an experiment in COVID where one summer everything was remote. And I think it's true that there was less somehow disparity, if you like, between people, but they were just doing a lot less.
Okay, so
if you quantified per idea or per progress, then probably this is skewed, right? And the denominator is different.
I'm not sure that this was actually posed for progress. But I think the point that the researcher is trying to make here is that in terms of thinking about trust, it might be counterintuitive for us to think that a remote first configuration can be the one that where there's the least amount of conflict. And so I think that's why.
The least amount of conflict is between people that don't interact at all. There's none whatsoever, right? But they do absolutely nothing. So that's what I'm saying. If you have to quantify it in a different way, you have to divide, the progress they make. Divide the conflict by the progress made. So
Right. We'll consider that.
what you pay per idea to an angst.
Yes.
I also find it surprising that this has the most trust. I always found that trust is built in interpersonal communications, where there are a lot of subtle hints that just don't translate.
Well, there are a lot of subtleties that don't translate remote, but trust can be built in a remote environment. It has to be built in a remote environment. Otherwise, it's pretty bad because it's here to stay. It's not going to really be going anywhere. So we have to learn how to master this situation. And it could be too also that depending on the age of the people that were in the particular study, some people really do prefer a dispersed environment because their communication skills are better adapted to that environment than others. So for some people, face-to-face is actually very difficult. It's complex. Okay.
Add one more comment that I think conflict and trust are not exactly mutually opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So you can certainly have a situation with very little trust and very little conflict, but also you can have a situation with some trust and a lot of conflict, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So in some sense, I would say that here I would agree with this diagram in terms of the conflict axis. I would say that with trust, it's much more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, even if you have people who are in person, the amount of trust that you place in them is partly a question of how well they can explain to you what they're doing and how well you can understand what they're doing, right? Through their communication skills or some other things. So that is more complicated than just being in person or remote. It's more of a style of, think of an office environment. There's usually a person you really trust. What does that mean? It means that the person can really explain to you what's going on. I go into the math department, they tell me I have a grant with so much money, and some people I trust, and some I don't. This is not being recorded, right?
It is.
I know that some people have one significant digit and some several significant digits, and that's just because of the way they've explained to me what means what, right?
Yeah,
and so
you're right. That's a good comment. Yeah. In fact, you're in a sense corroborating the slides that came before. Was that there is so much involved in establishing that trust. So you're right. It is not just whether you are remote or not. So I'm going to move on if nobody has any other comments. But this is great discussion. Thank you. All right. So yeah, there really is no simple dichotomy. There's no one way to do this. This is not a panacea. It's just about which patterns work for which teams. Okay, and it's up to everyone, each of us, to find what's effective. And so really quickly, these are some of the factors that are influencing virtual teams. And we know all of this. We talked about this before. Seniority is something that we haven't talked about. But also technical hurdles. Some people feel more comfortable in different environments versus others. And with respect to building a virtual team culture, here, this is, if you notice, the first bullet is about, explicit direction, right? We have to make the communication more formal. It must be more explicit. And the other bullet below it is negotiation. And so here, this is the development of norms and values. So if you are wanting to develop culture, even at IPAM, and this is an in-person event, you still want to make sure that you spend time thinking about what are the values and norms of the different teams that you want to form, and how will you communicate with others and with each other? What are their policies, or how will you document your meetings? How do you want to establish your workflows? So all of those ideas are ideas that you can also employ in an in-person environment. And then here on the other side are some ideas for meetings. Some of you have mentioned meetings to me while we've been chatting, and so I hope you'll take a look at some of this. All right, I want to have some time to talk to you about team of teams. So this is what I really see IPAM, in your experience, could become. So you're going to be forming small teams, but then also you want to, in your small teams, you want to cross-pollinate, you want to collaborate, and you want to be able to go back to your organizations with this experience, and you want to be able to take what you've learned, and you want to be able to continue to communicate with others. And so what we are doing in the Exascale computing project, because our project is so large, we are actually looking at this idea of team of teams. Now, why did we choose this? Why did we not choose groups of groups? Well, because, we are a large group, and as a very large organization, what we want to do is we want to instill this idea of team, of shared goals, of shared narrative. And so there are certain things that need to be in the recipe if you want to have an effective team of teams. And here's a very quick shout out to Tim and how his very small team was very effective to be a Gordon Bell nominee about 25 years ago. Yeah. But they did a great job, and they were a small team, and they were able to innovate. And so that is the challenge that we have as we scale our teams and as we move into this science VUCA environment. How do we take the innovation, the agility, the adaptability of small teams, so the teams you will form here, and how do we scale it up for Exascale? And so, Tim, I don't know if you'd like to say anything about your experience in your small team.
I mean, just really briefly elaborating on that third bullet. So there were kind of two teams in this. The four pictures, mostly for the Los Alamos people, are Mike Warren, Dave Moulton, Eric Hagberg, and Dave Neal. And Dave Moulton and Eric Hagberg were seen as postdocs at the time, and they were kind of assembling the hardware, doing getting the bits and quotes that built the cluster. And then there was a science team that was mostly Mike and me running Mike's cosmology code and my MD code, which is there. And there really wasn't any need for the two teams within each team that we worked closely together, but two teams didn't, except for Mike being in both teams. I'm not sure how scalable that process is of having one person who has the whole big picture in mind, but it worked well at that scale.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it works well at that scale. But how do we take that and move it into a different environment? And so in the book Team of Teams that General McChrystal wrote with others, we talk about the different organizations. So there's a hierarchy, and then there's the network, and then he talks about a hybrid. And so what he found in his situation, and what we're learning, is that hierarchy isn't always as effective for agility or for moving quickly because of the way that the organization is formed. So a networked environment is actually better, but it comes with a trade-off, because really what you are doing in a networked environment is it's flatter and it's more flexible, and so there has to be a lot of trust built, and it is an environment where different teams will have some autonomy to make decisions themselves. And so the hybrid is actually, if you notice here, what we're trying to do is consider the network in each of these nodes here. So you have, in the sense, the teams of teams. There can be a hierarchical structure, but you want to be able to have these teams that understand that their goals are shared and that they can communicate with each other. And so you saw this slide. This was about our Exascale computing project. And so the difference here is that we want to move from the command of teams to a team-of-team structure, which doesn't involve command at all. In fact, The ingredients for this type of structure are shared consciousness or an aligning narrative. An aligning narrative is that shared goal, empowered execution, and leading like a gardener. Those of you who are gardeners may appreciate this. And then embedding members or liaisons in other teams. And so that's actually probably what I'll spend the most time on, because I think it is probably the most important for the type of workshop or experience that you're going to be doing. Okay. So the first idea of scaling is this notion of shared consciousness. And that is pretty much having a shared mental model among all of the team members. So here, team members have to understand what the goals are. They have to be able to articulate them. Policies or processes and practices are usually set up in the team so that they can be efficient and they're transparent and sharing information. Let's see. It really, depending on the type of project, is how you would set up your meetings and how you would start to collaborate. This is an example from one of the projects, actually at Los Alamos. The key idea being here that this particular code team inherited each other. They came from existing teams, and so they had a lot of barriers that they had to overcome, a lot of notions that people brought with them to the team. And they had different cultural differences, like their different coding styles and the vocabulary that they used. Even their reporting requirements were different. And so, what do you do in a situation like this where you seem to be working from even, not even a good optimal situation, but from one that is not so great? Well, what they did was actually, believe it or not, they instituted some change, and one of the changes was tea time. So the tea time is actually very important. What they did was they made tea time mandatory. So mandatory tea time, meaning you had to go. Even if you didn't want to go, even if you thought it wasn't valuable, they enforced it at the beginning because not everybody was a believer that tea time was not a waste of time. And over time, the team started to realize that unstructured, that very deliberately planned, but yet unstructured time was very good for the team. That's where the team was able to build a lot of trust, talk about new ideas in an unstructured way. And so this really helped them overcome some of their cultural differences. And also another thing that they did was to institute very deliberately make decisions about the technical tools that they would be using. And so this empowered execution is about leadership. And here, the leader of a team doesn't necessarily micromanage the team. This is actually about letting the team have some autonomy and be able to make some decisions at different levels of the team members so that you can accelerate the progress and that it will reaffirm this aligning narrative of the team. So what is not empowered execution is that you have an independent programmer, a hero programmer, or somebody that does everything. That is not necessarily very conducive for an empowered execution. It is rather very deliberate and autonomous development of the team. And so it might be, depending on the size of your teams, if you have 2 people, 3 people, you're just going to have to see, how this will work for you. But I think that one of the most important things that you can do is realize that you're part of a larger ecosystem. And in this ecosystem, it will really be about cultivating the environment to allow these ideas to grow and to foster. And it doesn't happen with a heavy hand. And so that is the point of this particular idea of leading like a gardener. And you can see this video later where he talks about what that's like. There is something that is important, and that is the aligning narrative, making sure that we have the same objectives in mind, and whether or not we have people in critical roles that are also participating with other teams. And so this is what I want to spend a few minutes on. So in this idea of crawl, walk, hike, run, if you think about the different weeks that you have at IPAM, and if you think about how you'll be forming your teams and thinking about the language and the norms, your different values that you bring to the table, I really encourage you to identify liaisons. These are people within your teams that could also work with and meet with other teams so that you can cross-pollinate and connect with others. This is something that is used actually in ECP quite unintentionally. It has a lot to do with the code. Sometimes when code touches other code, it makes certain people really important to more than one code base. And so these people end up being liaisons for the teams, and they share information across the teams. And so this is a type of thing that breaks down silos and is very good for the development of teams and team-of-teams communication. And it can actually accelerate innovation. And so as you do this, think about, by the time we get to the hackathon, hopefully you will have some liaisons. Yeah, go ahead, Virginie. Oh, so hopefully you'll have some, by the time we get to the hackathon, you will have some liaisons that you maybe the liaisons are meeting regularly or talking regularly and sharing information, so that after the hackathon and as you move out of your experience at IPAM, you can continue these conversations when you go back to your communities. Yes?
No, just to say that.
Oh, that was it.
Use the remaining.
Sorry?
It was just to give you the remaining.
Oh, yeah. No, it's okay. So actually, that's my last slide. I have a few slides here that are for you to take away. These are different resources that you have. The ECP program has actually put a lot of resources out. So we have an online community. There are panels on remote working. There's certainly a lot of software technologies and math libraries. These have been mentioned, and what I've done is I've listed here the links for you so that you have that, so that, during this time. And then, these are just some more information about ideas and better scientific software. Some resources that were from the team of teams that were not on the slides, if you care to read about it. And so that's the end of the tutorial. So thank you very much.